Hello everybody and welcome back to Shay with Amos. I'm your host Jacob Gordy, and joining me today is the, I don't want to say infamous, the ever legendary, John Ebeid. Everybody, how are you?
Good, Jacob. How are you?
He asked for an epic intro, and I was like, this is the best I can do.
I thought you'd be a bit more epic than that, but I guess
we could like infamous.
Yeah. That would be nice if we can do some green trees. Be good.
You got that? Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Well, how are you?
Good. Thank you for making some time to talk to me, and
no problem. Thanks for
excited about the interview.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So usually when I do these interviews, I usually let's start from the beginning, right? It usually means when did you immigrate? But you are the first guest who technically didn't immigrate at all. You were born in Jersey?
No, I was actually born here in Chicago.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess tell us, growing up as someone who was born here, kind of like, what was that experience like?
It was actually a lot of fun. And now that I look back, so I was born here in Chicago, but my dad actually immigrated to the United States in '69. So that big kind of first wave that came. And of course, they all landed in Detroit because they were all engineers, and that was, the heart of the automotive industry here. But the one thing that really stands out in my mind, I think, carries through, our story of, even though I maybe didn't immigrate here and I was born here, still obviously first generation, but still having all of our roots tied to the church. It was remembering, Dad telling us stories about how they'd all get together and, they'd all drive together to Toronto, because that was the only church in Canada, and that's where they would go like every other week. And then they would do stuff to, come back to Michigan and bring, Buenos to Michigan. And then my dad came to Chicago in the early 70s. So, for me growing up, a lot of it was kind of being torn between two worlds, because, when I was first born, and obviously here up until probably the age of 5, really didn't speak English, right? So everything was in Arabic, because that's, parents spoke Arabic, very little English. So, it was very much like I, was an American. And then obviously you start school. And now when you're in school, you're starting to obviously learn more English, you're watching TV. So while I wasn't necessarily, an immigrant and I was born here, it was still those roots, still speaking Arabic, not really knowing English kind of as a second language to begin with. But of course we pick it up that much quicker when, you get into school. But then it was still carrying on. Obviously we're Coptic, like that rich history. So not only was it being Egyptian, it was also being Coptic. And, what did that mean with being, Coptic Christian? And obviously coming and people not knowing who you are. So for me, a lot of growing up was kind of being in the middle of two worlds and then trying to navigate that. And one of the things, even, growing up, obviously our parents being very tight, controlling over who our friends were, what we did. They tried and really kind of keep us in a bubble, right?
Yeah,
and it was like,
can't
change, right? It's like you can only hang out with like your Egyptian friends, and it was interesting because everything that we ever did was tied to church. So it was every activity, every one of my friends, and it was by design, I think. So it was like our parents all got together and decided we've got to figure out ways to make sure that our kids stay together. And remember, we all lived in different spots. So majority of us lived anywhere from 30 to an hour away from church, yet everybody made an effort to get us to church, whether it was on Wednesdays or Fridays or Saturdays when we did, Nedwes. But it was really that way of keeping us all together. And in fact, when I think back to my childhood, I don't really, even going back to like high school, primarily all of my friends were around church. And it wasn't even our church. It expanded because we would go do things in Cleveland, we go do things in Detroit. So it was almost like you could go anywhere and you were connected. I mean, I even remember back in my early professional days, I could go to any city, find a Coptic church, find people that, we had something familiar with. And it was like you always had a home. But I think, growing up for us, that's the one thing that really helped us still kind of maintain who we were culturally, being, Egyptian, who we were spiritually, being Copts, and not forgetting that, and still being able to, thrive here in a new land. So for me, that was, I think, the most important thing. But then keeping it thriving, keeping it going, it was really one thing that I love what we did here in Chicago with people like Uncle Atif, where like everything around, even our activities, whether it was the NEDWAs or the 3-day camps or the Midwest retreats, it was all about not only uniting us and keeping us together, but even more broadly, like I said, across Detroit and Cleveland. But then it was everything we did. I mean, Friday nights we'd play football, together. We'd have basketball to the point where, we built that first basketball court, in the parking lot of the church. I remember we'd rope it off because we'd want no one to park there on Sunday, and we'd make people move their cars. But that's what kept us all together, so much so that we decided to build the gym, because it was like if we could create somewhere where there was more space and, we could play in the winter. And again, everything just always revolved around keeping us together so that we wouldn't forget who we are, and we would remember where we came from, and more so, keep us all centered around Christ.
Yeah. So then this kind of brings up, I don't want to say a good point, but a point that I've noticed, at least myself growing up, so me and you have something in common. I was also born here in America. I'm first generation as well. And one thing I noticed when I was kind of growing up is that there was, especially when I was younger, there was a bit of a disconnect between those who immigrated and those who were born here, right? So I guess my question is, when you were growing up, did you ever feel that type of disconnect, or did it exist at all? I mean, what do you think?
To be honest, I don't think it existed. In fact, I think it might have been the opposite. Remember us being here, first generation, majority of us knew each other, right? All of our families that came kind of immigrated early together. We were sort of all in that same 5-10 years of when they came over. So majority of us were born here. So I think it was more so now we were getting introduced to people that were actually immigrating, that were new immigrants.
Yeah.
So, and what it was really trying not to make them feel left out. A lot of times, they would come obviously not knowing English, and trying to get them to assimilate into, our community, but then even to our schools, right? Obviously with us going to different junior highs, elementary schools, high schools, when people would come, they'd be going to Downer South or, Hinsdale, and then even now Bolingbrook, right, as it's growing, but then trying to get them, one of the great pieces was that you still had the family here. It didn't matter that you just, came from Egypt. Yeah. You had automatic friends because you had people here, at church. So it wasn't ever like we felt we didn't know what was happening or what was going on. We felt left out. I will say the one thing that, trying to do, and it's the one thing that I think still even challenges us till today, which is the language barriers. I mean, for the longest time, our liturgies were primarily, right, Arabic, Coptic, a little bit of English, and we started, doing a little bit more English, to now we finally had almost, liturgies in all English. But even those language barriers that were difficult, I don't think it ever caused you to feel like we were missing out on something. The only real good thing is you wanted to know Arabic just so that you knew when your parents were yelling at you and what they were saying, or if they were talking about what you guys were doing, we would understand. So that was a great thing. So that's the one thing I know my kids now, unfortunately, don't speak any Arabic, but it's the one reason they would love to learn how to speak Arabic is so that they know when we're talking about them. But we never felt like, there was something different from us. In fact, the only time I think we felt there was something different is when I'd show up to school in elementary school and I'd have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and pita bread. And kids would be like, what are you eating? Or I'd have a falafel sandwich and I'd have to explain we were fasting or we ran out of toast, so I'd use pita bread. So I still felt like I was an immigrant, but I really wasn't. But I really think it was the one thing, again, just the family at the church. It never made you feel like you were left out, whether you were an immigrant, you were born here, you just came here. We were always one family, so you never felt different or out of place. So
then on that point, I'm going to go to our Outlook question. So I always ask a type of Outlook question at the end of every interview so that the audience watching, 10, 15 years from now will know, hey, this is what these guys said we should do, so let's do it. So you're giving advice to future generations, so get ready, okay? But my question is, as the church grows, especially at the rapid rate it's been growing, I think in Illinois in the past 20 years, we've had 4 or 5 churches open in Illinois alone. Not let alone, the entire Midwest. We have 2 in Minnesota now, a bunch in Iowa, or I think 1 in Iowa actually, Wisconsin, wherever, right? And because of that rapid growth, we're beginning to see, I guess, not disunity, that's not the right word, but there is a little bit of a disconnect, you know what I mean? So I guess my question is, as the church grows, right, at the rate that it's growing and the congregation becomes much more diversified, right, mix of kids like me who were born here, converts, new immigrants, stuff like that. How do we maintain that unity and keep that family alive?
So your question on how do we maintain that family, that unity, I think number one, we got to remember what actually unifies us, and that's Christ. We're all members in Christ. And I think that's the one thing whenever in anything we do, we have to remember that that's the main objective. You mentioned how quickly we've expanded. I was telling you stories before, and I wasn't even alive yet, but listening to my dad tell me about driving to Toronto to go to church, and then I think even one of the first churches in the U.S., whether it was Michigan, or Chicago, I think it's a little debate on who and was the first established church. Okay, yeah. But one of the first. Let's leave it at that. But then to see, like you're saying,
cancel John.
how quickly it's grown, right? I mean, went from one church to two churches to three to four, and now having a mission church in the city, we're expanding. And one of the things that I really believe in is that our expansion, it should be organic from us here, not expecting immigrants coming from Egypt that are spreading the Coptic, faith here. I mean, it's all Christianity, right? But the one thing that's so special about being Orthodox is that we haven't changed. So exactly what was brought down to us from St. Mark till today hasn't changed. We haven't changed anything about our dogma, about our beliefs, even our liturgies and our hymns. That's what's very special, is it hasn't changed. So I think when we're talking about what are things that we can do, we've got to remember first that we're Orthodox. And then we've got to think about things where, we don't want to change things in our faith so that we can attract others or make it easier. But again, we've got to remember that we're in different lands of immigration, whether you're in the United States or you're in the UK or you're in Australia, right? It's different than being in Egypt. And I think what we're doing, especially with the churches that are the mission churches in the cities, and what they're doing, where they're doing more English, right? So 100% in English. So the teachings are still the same, the liturgies are the same, but people need to understand what they're listening to. I mean, that was our biggest challenge as kids. Like, Mom, what do I got to go try? I don't understand a word what they're saying. I got to sit here and listen to Abuna's Waza and Arabic, and I don't understand anything. Oh, that's a waste of my time. Well, if we make it something where people can come and they can listen, they can enjoy, they understand, I mean, that's the first hurdle. I think we're starting to do a lot of that with the mission churches, but people have to see something in us first, right? And they got to see something in us as Coptic Christians to say, what is that Jacob? Why is Jacob like that? Why is John like that? And then realize it's because of our church, our faith, our love in Christ, and they want to be part of that. So I think whether it's Catholicism or Coptic, and it's that love of Christ. It's showing others that Christ loves them, and what that power, that hope in Christ is, and that's what's going to attract them to the church. And then we want to make them feel welcomed. I mean, to me, the most important thing is when someone first walks in the door. I mean, I feel terrible when we know somebody that's not Egyptian or someone's not a member of the church and they're coming into our church. It's almost as if they're ostracized and they're sitting there in a pew by themselves, not understanding a word of what's going on. And all it takes is something as simple as somebody going in and just saying hello and welcoming them, right? And to me, we should be a welcoming church. So I think how we're going to thrive here is it's got to be organic. It's got to come from us, and it's coming from great things like you're doing now with these interview series. It's taking initiative. I mean, I'll tell you, we probably wouldn't be where we're at today if it didn't start with people like Uncle Atif, Uncle Faye, that started the Sunday school, and then when we started the 3-day camps. And I mean, I vividly remember growing up, if it wasn't for people I looked up to like Joe Mo and Sony Chris and Henny Buttar, and Adel Babawi, like those are the guys who taught us to love the church and to want to be servants. And then I'm hoping that we were able to do the same for people that were under us, but it starts with us and having servants that want to attract people, want to bring people to Christ. And then the most important thing is that they see it in us. It's not lip service. They see it through our actions, and they want to be part of this because they see something special there.
Yeah. All right. So with that said, I agree. Yes, we do need to lead by example. And thank you for being an example. Believe it or not, he actually taught me Sunday school. Could you believe that? I know. Yeah. Everyone thinks so.
I wish I could take credit for a lot of what you're doing now, but it's really things that you guys are doing. But I hope you are influenced by others and you see kind of what's happening. And I love the fact that you're doing something different. I don't think, growing up, nobody did anything like this. I mean, this is cool. It's new. It's taking advantage of technology. I mean, it's looking at different streams in media to be able to get Christ into people's lives. And if this is one way to do it, it's fantastic. And we can't always think there's only one way and be stuck in it. So I would encourage you to continue to think differently, do things different, because there are multiple ways you can serve. And this is one cool, unique way.
Shay, thank you. Well, with that said, though, that's all the time we have for you today. So thank you so much for coming. It's been an awesome blessing, honestly, so thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. But before we go, some astute viewers might have noticed John doesn't have a mug. And in fact, Uncle Sam doesn't have a mug either. So, story is, our mug supplier that we usually order our mugs from is like a local shop. The machine they use broke. They were switching shops and it broke, and we were their only customers really for that. So they kind of ceased services for us. So because of that, I am opening up the floor. If there's any Coptic business people or people who may just have cup shops or anything like that wants to make us some cups, by all means, DM us at smc.official on Instagram. And we might put an email under there too. Just email us your information, your prices, and we'll be more than happy to. I do want to get John a mug though, because the mugs are really cool. If you guys want to know how cool the mugs are, go back to, I think season 2, episode 2 with Joe. Is that episode 2, Joe? Go back to episode 2, and he does a nice advertisement for us for the mugs. So with that said, though, that's all we have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you again, John, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. And God bless and good night.